Hello, Sir Giovanni Otohan. I am John Patrick M. Bandala, the leader of Group A about the topic of COVID-19 pandemic, and now me and my members will represent our research paper with the title of The Effects of COVID-19 Pandemic on Education Through the Lens of the Students on the Issue. So first of all, education plays a pivotal role for every student and teachers across the world. And the COVID-19 pandemic is experienced in every country and one of the major problems worldwide. So in times of pandemic, it challenges and impacts the education of the students and educators around the world. So the chosen topic is so relevant to what people are facing right now. This pandemic has resulted in schools closures across the world. Education has changed dramatically with the distinctive rise of e-learning, whereby teaching is undertaken remotely and on digital platforms. In these studies, it is essential to know the effects on how every country provides a solution to solve the issue, and it may help the people in addressing the impacts on education during COVID-19 pandemic.
In my topic, what makes the topic global or international issue? Like many other aspects of everyday life, COVID 19 has had a serious impact on students, instructors, and educational organizations around the globe. The pandemic caused schools, colleges, and universities across the globe to shut down their campuses so that the students could follow social distancing measures, stated by Toquero 2020. That being said, moving smoothly from an environment of conventional education to distance and virtual learning could not happen overnight. This rapid transformation is linked to various obstacles and challenges at this point. But because nobody knows when this pandemic will disappear fully, educational institutions across the globe decided to use the already available technical resources to create online learning. Material for students of all academic fields. Conventional classroom socialization is another major missing in online learning. Students only communicate with their fellows digitally and never see fellow students in person. And thus, the real-time sharing of ideas, knowledge, and information is partially missing from the digital learning world. By Breathe 2006.
So the three selected countries are China, India, and Colombia. So in February 9, nearly 200 million primary and secondary school students in China started their new semester online. With all schools closed due to the coronavirus outbreak, the country embarked on what might amount the largest simultaneous online learning exercise in human history. The Ministry of Education launched an initiative entitled Ensuring Learning and Undisruptive when Classes Are Disrupted. Over the course of 2 weeks, with all face-to-face meetings banned, the ministry organized teleconference with schools, management agencies, online platform, and course providers, telecom providers, and other stakeholders to plan the implementation of the initiative. So in India, in a press release put out by the Ministry of Human Resource Development or HRD on March 21, 2020, the Union HRD Ministry shared various free digital e-learning platforms by the Ministry of HRD. The students capitalized to continue their learnings during COVID-19 based school closures. Content for students, teachers, and parents aligned to the curriculum, including the video lessons, worksheets, textbooks, and assessments. In Colombia, the country of Colombia, The preventive quarantine started the week of March 16, 2020, and the academic calendar was adjusted as a result. Colombia was begun broadcasting educational programs on both public radio and television for students from primary to middle schools across the country in coordination with teachers and educational institutions.
COVID-19 pandemic spread all over the world. Philippines, together with the subordinates and the Department of Education, adopting learning continuity plan to pursue education amidst of this COVID-19 pandemic. Upon adopting this new learning, several issues, including the unstable internet connection by Jones 2019, and also the lack of environmental conducive to learn Bagayos 2020. Therefore, parents, student, teacher endure several adjustments.
Lastly, in the background of the study, in this light, the researchers decided to conduct the study because they believe that education during pandemic is a serious issue that needs to be addressed. It needs to be researched to know what are the impacts of the pandemic on education, also how every country provide a solution in this pandemic. In fact, the researchers are very serious in this study. Education during COVID-19 pandemic through the lens of the students.
COVID-19 pandemic generated a huge restriction in the area of educational system all over the world. Billions of students and educators were affected when the usual face-to-face education was turned out into virtual and online system. Developed and undeveloped countries like China, India, Colombia, and the Philippines experienced the same trauma as the impact of this pandemic is most likely devastating in almost all countries. As a matter of fact, some end up with school closures while other in most of the countries end up practicing other positive and logical solution. This is by means of switching to e-learning, virtual and online class.
The problem in the pandemic, in terms of education, is not completely eradicated. Those three countries that are being mentioned are just making their best in order to lessen and prevent the effects of COVID-19 on the education of the students. In India, to prevent and eradicate the darkness caused by the COVID-19, the government of India has taken number of preventive measures, including the closure of all educational institutions, followed by one-day nationwide Janta curfew to combat virus and 21 days lockdown to curb the coronavirus and etc. In China, the government has banned and strict containment measures have been proved, in practice, to significantly reduce the spreading of the epidemic. Lastly, Colombia. Colombia conducts confinement of all the students in the country in order to stop the spreading of the virus.
Okay, so now we will represent our individual conclusion. So, in my conclusion, all over the globe suffering brought by the COVID-19 pandemic, and it has a big impact to our lives. In our topic, we made a decision as a group to search three countries and in the Philippines to gather an information about the education during COVID-19 pandemic, on how it really affects to them and on how they solve these problems or issue. So as a student, I really care about what we feel right now because it affects our education, and the students all over the globe need to continue their studies in order to learn, to educate, and to have a bright future someday. Education are very important because it gives us knowledge, job skills, key to success, basic facts, and cultural norms, values to apply to ourselves. And lastly, I believe that even some countries cannot solve this kind of problem, and many students are want to have face-to-face classes. We can do this to defeat the COVID-19 pandemic, and hopefully soon it will be back to the normal life and normal situation. That's all.
For the conclusion in the issue that we have chosen, the pandemic affects and creates different problems, including education. It showed that education during COVID-19 pandemic is a major issue wherein every country experience and still finding a way on how to end this awful situation. Some countries already found a solution on how to continue the education in times of pandemic through online learning and stops the face-to-face education. On the other hand, other countries are having a hard time to engage in online learning because they are lack of resources and funds. I know and I believe that every country is doing their best to provide a solution in dealing with pandemic. As a student, I admit that it's hard to learn through online class since it needs to have a good connection, gadgets, and good mental health. But it's a great way to continue education during pandemic. We must always remember that education is important, but securing the safety of every student and educators are most important. So every country implements online learning to avoid the increasing of cases across the world.
The lesson that I gained from the COVID 19 pandemic is that teachers and students ought to arrange utilization of various online instructive devices. After the COVID 19 pandemic, when the ordinary classes resume, educators and students ought to be urged to keep utilizing such online apparatuses to upgrade instructing and learning.
Conclusion. As effect of the pandemic, people are able to challenge the lifestyle, especially in education. Due to this crisis, the traditional learnings able to convert to online learnings, which are able students to challenge themselves in the field of education. This able to distinguish students how challenging and complicated this batch of learning, especially with the aim that education must still be continued in the midst of pandemic.
So, for my conclusion, the COVID 19 pandemic greatly affects our normal life, such as our life in school. As a result, schools have been forced to shift into online classes. Conducting online classes is the only way out to keep imparting knowledge. Since we students have our different homes and have different environments, some will find this smooth taking an online class, but some will get distracted because of their environment. But in overall aspects, online classes is successful in terms of giving education for our students and being safe, and at the same time learning a lot.
This pandemic is not a hindrance for countries to continue education. Upon knowing that learners are most likely vulnerable to virus contamination, government in every country see to it that education should not be stopped. The same practice was implemented by pushing education to virtual and online system.
COVID-19 pandemic highly affected us, especially in education sector. And it is also stated that China, India, and Cambodia still affected on this pandemic. This study represents the effects and the solution. Indeed, we face a lot of challenges. Therefore, schools at all levels need to strengthen the quality of education upon this new normal. Lastly, We need to be prepared. Take this concern seriously for the better future.
Okay, so that was our video presentation, and that's all, and have a nice day. God bless.